One of the things that happens at that witching hour, that like 2 to 4 a.m.,
Yes.
right? I have all these patients that wake up, and I've been guilty of it too. And especially if it's happening on multiple nights and repeatedly, then you're
Yeah.
kind of throwing sleep deprivation onto it. And we have all of these thoughts, and they're not all real. And I always try to remember to encourage my patients to know that when you have the kooky, random, usually not pleasant or positive thought that doesn't make you feel all warm and cuddly, but then promotes the anxiety, I need to do stuff tomorrow, what am I going to do? I'm not sleeping, right? In that realm, what I've been telling them is that those thoughts are just your mind, that sleep deprived mind that's going to promote more of this negative and anxious thinking because you have less regulation of certain parts of your brain that help you regulate your emotions. You're going to lean toward things that are more unpleasant. And I'm just thinking about what you're saying here and going, how do I help that person at 2 a.m.? Maybe that's another therapy that we haven't yet covered, but it just made me think of that. And I was like, wow, what can we do when that happens? Recognizing that, yes, our emotions are real at that moment, but they may not really be real in the sense of our brain's not firing on all cylinders either.
Yes, absolutely. And I think obviously during that time, right, a lot of people do wake up between that 2 to 4 time. I know historically they call it the witching hour, and there might be some psycho-spiritual thing associated with that. But I think that there's another part of this that is, yes, our mind is always telling us a story. It doesn't always mean it's true. But I think from narrative therapy, a beautiful reframe that one of my clients and I went over one time is similar. There were these thoughts that were keeping the client up at night and all of this stuff. And, I think that when we do that, it means that we genuinely care. So shifting the narrative in your mind to, oh, something's wrong with me, I can't sleep, all of this stuff, to my mind is showing me that, like, this is important to me. This thing is important to me, whatever it is that I'm stressing out about, and starting to recognize that it's, again, playing a role into that. Now, the question then becomes, how do we start to quiet the mind so we can get back into that rest and digest
Mm-hmm.
system, right? And that's kind of where some of these other somatic modalities or meditation starts to come in, especially with like TRE, trauma and tension release exercises, which I know we'll start to talk about as well. But from the idea of a basic nervous system structure is, we have our fight or flight response, which is our sympathetic arousal or hypoarousal. And then we have the freeze or the fawning response, which is more of that dorsal vagal response, the down-regulated part of our nervous system, and we can get stuck in those. And so as we're kind of talking about the brain, the amygdala is responsible for, the primal part of keeping us safe, keeping us alive. It's that fight or flight within us. And when trauma happens to us over and over and over, especially complex trauma, and on that note, I think it's important to define what trauma is, because a lot of people think that trauma could be this big thing like a car accident or the death in the family or something. But really what they've started to find is trauma is just the perception of a life-threatening event, right? And so like somebody could scream at you and I, and we might be like, okay, that guy's having a bad day. But if somebody screams at a 5-year-old, that baby could be like, oh my God, this is the end of the world. And then that's ingrained in them, and then we have all of these triggers and things that get coupled together, because our brain is always trying to process what's going on and trying to make sense of it. And so part of this is when we live in the amygdala and that fight or flight all of the time, and we don't do more somatic modalities to heal, the nervous system itself, then we can't really shift into more of the adult brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. And in similar ways like DBT, that's our wise mind, right? When we're an emotion mind, a lot of times we're in the amygdala. And so when we can kind of come into the idea of being in the prefrontal cortex, it's a lot easier for us to be able to then show up in a way that's more rational or more logical and also balanced. Done studies on this with meditators, and they've taken studies with people who haven't ever meditated before. And they took them through, I believe it was like a 2-month process, and they brain scanned their amygdalas in their brain before. And what they found is that there was actually more activity after these people started to learn to meditate, even if it was just 15 minutes a day over that 2-month course of that study, as their prefrontal cortex started to turn on more. And so they started to find that there was a direct correlation between breath, between focusing and steadying our mind, and then the prefrontal cortex starting to turn on more than the amygdala. And so it's part of this is starting to how do we get again out of that doer mind versus more into this beer mind or this wise minded balance state as well. So, kind of a longer answer to your question, but, to get into how do we stop these racing thoughts is a lot of this is our nervous system gets stuck into these patterns of go, 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 or fight or flight. And then we don't know any better because we're just the hamster on the wheel. And then when the nervous system starts to calm down or we start to rest, then our brain sometimes perceives that as a threat. And then it goes back to familiar chaos because that's what we know all the time. So if somebody's constantly on the go during that time where they have nothing and everything's quiet, those racing thoughts can start to come in sometimes because the brain perceives the rest almost as this like threat to the nervous system because it's not used to it. And so part of that is then shifting, and over time, then it starts to be a little bit easier to sit in stillness.
I got to tell you, this is like hitting on some pain points within myself, because when you talk about trauma, it was difficult having a lot of really super sick patients and kind of feeling like I wasn't able to care for them in the way that I would normally like to care for my ICU patients. It was really sort of trauma in the sense of lots and lots of bodies getting really sick, and we were just putting Band-Aids on everyone and doing what we can during the pandemic. And that in and of itself, I think, is a form of trauma that,
Absolutely.
and I'm sort of interested in that because I think there's a lot of healthcare workers, myself included, who may need to kind of start to own that trauma a little bit and define it a little bit. And it, nobody tried to come after me or anything like that. But when you're used to kind of being able to predict what's going to happen in even really difficult situations, kind of know. And then we were having, we didn't know that these people were clotting, and you'd be fine. You'd be on the phone with their family and explaining this, and then they're coding the next minute. And, you don't forget those experiences, and being able to kind of lean into that and, work through it. What was also, I think, I see it a lot in healthcare workers is, especially if you're kind of in the sector that I was in terms of medicine, which is pulmonary and ICU and everything. I was so used to medicines telling you, see more patients, also answer all of your task buckets. Take this phone call, do prior authorizations. By the way, you're now getting called up because there's an emergency on the 3rd floor that you need to manage. Oh, the hospital's calling you. You got to go back to the hospital. And all these things, all this multitasking and stuff that we got good. I use that in air quotes because, yeah, you can do it. But it slowly kind of strips away what you're feeling inside, and kind of strips away the joy of why we went into medicine in the first place. And I really relate to the idea of this hamster on the wheel thing, because as I started to recognize that this was no longer serving me, and that it was really important for me to kind of put myself ahead of everyone else, it also became very scary to think of, what does that look like in real life? Like, what does that look like for paying bills? What does that look like? How are other people going to perceive me that I did that, right? Am I going to be looked down upon? Am I going to have people that don't like me as a result of that? How does that make me feel? And then it became like, snap. Well, some of the reasons that I was perpetuating my behavior was specifically because I didn't want to disappoint people. I felt like I had to meet some standard or some bar. And then when I took a step back, and then I really did have more time on my hands, I renovated a shore house property, and I did these other things. And what I'm recognizing now is, because I see it as I start to ramp up again a little bit with where my career is now kind of taking off a little bit now, and there's more opportunities, I became okay with not being that hamster on the wheel, but I had been it for so long that feeling, just as you describe, of being able to step away, I was like, it still feels uncomfortable. And I actually think I actively have to kind of talk myself out of, well, I could do that. I could fit that in. It's just one more thing.
Yep.
And I'm just relating to the fact that the past couple of weeks have been so crazy for me, and I've been kind of working later days and making sure I'm making time for the kids and everything. Because even though I'm working from home now, I'm not, driving back from the hospital. I have this tendency, and there's got to be a lot of people listening who go, oh my goodness, if you're a type A go-getter, you want to be successful, you want to have that family life, you want to have it all. What do we do about it? What we need to do is start to learn about these therapies and actually start to incorporate them. And we don't have enough therapists to go around for each one of us to have one, I guess. Right. But what do we do? What's the solution here? I don't know.